It ended recording. Could I just ask you occasionally to just make sure that that red dot is there? If it's not there, it would be replaced by a green like pause symbol, and you can just press this big silver button, big chrome button back here.
To make it go again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's horrible. I
There's
can't
been
read
some
that.
unexpected benefits. Like I did OTF in my office yesterday, and so I had like a monitor to, look at stuff, and we may, it's gonna next being able to have that.
Our therapist little like super bad. It's just like my own
Our therapist is super bad.
aqua colors. These are like so awesome. Yeah.
Clock.
Yep. Yeah. So like I just bring my art stuff with me, so I'm always doing cool stuff.
Carlson.
Mr. Ritter.
That's a nice like Ian Dark commentary on the game.
What's that?
Your commentary was like Ian Dark synopsis of
Oh,
the game.
that's a compliment.
Yeah.
Did you read this email
What email?
that Katrina sent?
About Megan?
Yeah.
Megan?
Yeah.
No.
I'll try to.
Like, Megan went missing yesterday.
Oh, so she still hasn't been located?
Yeah, like her sister's looking for her.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She went, apparently, she was down here dropping off groceries. Right?
She went to move her
She
car.
said she was going to move her car from the alley and hasn't been seen or heard from since then. Her sister asked that I check with coworkers to see if anyone saw her leaving or might have any other info.
Like this Megan.
Our Megan?
Like,
Yeah.
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 Wow, that's
Yesterday? It was yesterday around, what,
Yesterday morning,
yesterday morning, like mid-morning.
10:30 or something, Katrina thinks.
No idea.
Scary.
What will I ask you both to come over here as opposed to auditorium style? Or just come? No. So I'm sort of sitting with this fear, uncertainty, and concern for Megan. Missed They sit there, it's just shoes, right? And so her sister hasn't heard from her. She left work yesterday to move her car and hasn't made contact with anybody since.
Left work yesterday in the morning to move her car?
Yeah, around 11 or so.
For car from the alley too, from back here. Yeah. She was dropping something off.
And I know for the last few months she's been struggling. And there's been a lot of change in her life. I'm just moving into like a beginning a slide set on acceptance. There's this piece of like, what does it actually mean when applied to situations that show up like this? And for me, in the context here, this is like, oh, we're learning about ACT, and ACT is really a technology of relating to suffering and a way of supporting people and supporting ourselves and doing the work in our daily life that we would like to do. The work being the work of relationship, the work of being a decent human being. And here we are confronted by somebody that we care about, who just unknown what's happening. And for us to get clear with what are we doing here, and how does that relate to it? How do we actually hold this? How do we hold our experience? And get clear with sort of what would be helpful now. So I've got this slide set, and I have my agenda of like, let's get through our slide set, and then we can move on to the practical skills. And we may do that. I'm just curious about curious about sort of where people are at with this thing. Like, I just don't know how to sort of take in. And there's really nothing we can do. Like, we can go scour the streets of Boulder. Unlikely that we will have anything. But there's really not much that we can do, like, other than sort of hold this uncertainty, hold this care, hold this concern, and then, you know, we're not the people who are appointed to be taking action. So to run around and think that we can do something really effective, might just be sort of taking care of our own ego's desire to have some effective action to take in the face of deep uncertainty and confusion. And that's something that I think that actually ACT does really well at, is helping us to remember that so much of the pain that we work with really just needs to be related. And it's essential that it be related with first, before there's any endeavor to shift, to change, to try to turn one's focus away from it in service of valued living. That there's this actual human encounter that takes place when people come into our office, when we go into somebody's home who has signed up to work with us and to do this. That the more we come with this agenda of let's change this, more likely we're going to be met with this agenda of like, you don't get it, one way or another. I'm fine, I don't need change, fuck you, go away, pain. And whatever responsibility we have, because we can't take responsibility for other people's actions, other people's choices, their experience. But what we can take responsibility for, what we need to take responsibility for, is our creativity and our courage and our willingness to actually be with another's pain, to be in the shit with another human being. And really just do our best to communicate that we see them and that we are there with them and that who they are is okay. And what they're experiencing is very hard to bear. So before I get into the slides, I'm just wondering, is there anything that people want to sort of bring into the room, into the circle?
I'd love to share something. A couple weeks ago, one of my best friends from high school, his father disappeared, and now he went out on a boat, and then the boat came back without him, washed ashore. And just now this with Megan, it's really hard to hear, and I'm wondering, will the people just disappear now? Like, what's happening? I just have this real strong desire to go call people I love.
It's incredibly rattling to the illusion of continuity. Oh, do. And life goes on. As long as I don't hear about people I love having bad things happen. It's okay. Thank you for sharing. And then it brings up this, like, oh my God, I love people. I want to keep them safe. I want to keep them close, knowing that maybe I can't keep people safe. So what does it mean to act now? Knowing that. Anything else you wanted to bring into this space?
I feel like I'm holding some sense of optimism because of how many possibilities I actually don't know for where Megan could be or what could have come up that my mind can like come up with a couple, but so many other things could be happening that aren't as drastic as my first thought. So I guess I'm trying to really swim in the ambiguity, like more ambiguity, because how much I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I want to welcome people to sort of shift focus at any point if there's a need that's showing up that is more immediate than theoretical words on the screen. And really ask a question of how do you take care of yourself in this moment? How do you tend your heart in this moment? As people who are professional relators to suffering, how do we engage here in this moment, knowing that like we are a rich and complex being whose hearts are wounded and open and armored and cracked and vital. signed up for this training, and there's this time, and there's this world that sort of moves on at its pace, that we sort of dance with. So I'd like to invite us all to just sort of engage with this, noticing sort of what's showing up for us, holding that all gently with an open hand, and just sort of letting this material wash over us and see how it affects our movements of our heart and mind, how we sort of make that. I think sometimes like this is the most incredible journey there is, moving from here to here, or here. Often, stylistically, we may be very adept at going one way on that journey, and then going the other way might be more of a challenge. So I invite you to just sort of watch how your energy, or your mind, or your heart moves, and as we sort of open up into this peace of acceptance. So go in.
Before we start, can we do 3 deep breaths?
Little three breaths, Megan. Is everybody familiar with this practice that we do here? So when we do 3 breaths, I sort of think of it as an abbreviated tonglen, where we actually invite. We often do this when there's sort of a sense of heaviness or just like this real immediate sort of suffering that we're relating to, and it feels like, more than one person can bear. And so 3 breaths is this opportunity for us to actually together call in the suffering, contact it. And I then often sort of breathe out a desire, a prayer, energy of freedom and clarity that might or benefit to that other person, or that maybe even just doing this together, that sense of community for this moment might lighten the load of any one individual. So when we do 3 breaths, we just call that person in or call that suffering in, actually making contact with it as well as we can, and also making contact with that desire for freedom, that desire for liberation. Not to make it go away or push it away, but to actually wake up within it fully. So let's do 3 breaths. So actually that 3 breaths exercise is an acceptance practice. That is a willingness practice. Our willingness to actually make contact with the thing, as opposed to scrambling to strategize on what we can do to get out of it. That's actually a fundamental shift in working with psychological suffering. Where people come to us saying, I've got this problem, make it go away. You guys are the experts, just make it better. Tell me what to do to get out of this. Right? And often in that move, it's very difficult to even find out where are you that you're trying to get out of. Right? It's as if somebody's sort of scrambling in a hole and they're just kind of like clinging with their feet just off the hole. They can't get any higher up, and they're afraid to go further down. But you actually don't even make contact with the ground without suffering, unless you actually slow this process down. So remember what we did last time, right? This stuff, right? First thing that came to your mind. It's very difficult to not solve the problems of these math problems, right? Our minds problem solved by nature. This was something that was evolutionarily selected for, and so we get a nice little dopamine hit or endorphin hit when we solve this problem. Ooh, that feels good. Okay. Again, it worked really well for transforming our world and transforming the physical world, building highways and technology and farms and means of transporting food and information. And yet we find something quite different when we start to bring those principles of problem solving to bear on our inner life. So that, taken all together, our minds are problem solvers by nature. So when there's something that we don't want, something we don't like, we're like, here's an opportunity. I can come in and fix this. So messages that we've taken in from our society are telling us that pain actually is a problem. I can fix this, right? If you're not feeling good with all your buddies, watching the game of your Super Bowl team, and having a great time at like Wing Street or whatever frickin' thing, then there's something wrong with you. You must be a lonely wretch. Or, if you're not driving the right car, if you don't have the right house, if you don't go to the right school, have the right partner, blah, blah, blah. What is wrong with you? There's a book out there, there's a video course, there's a dessert, there's a ring, there's a car, there's a mortgage lender who can give you all that you want. And once you have that, you should be happy. And if you're not happy, what's wrong with you? You've got everything. You've got everything. Why don't you have it? Why haven't you fixed this by now? And a classic sort of well-meaning, well-intentioned advice that we've gotten so much. But just don't be sad, honey. Just focus on the bright side. Don't think that. That's horrible. Why think that? That's what my mind does. So we'll look at this in sort of another slide, but the mechanisms of problem solving break down when addressing the world within the skin. So, right, this is moving from sort of a mechanistic world into this sort of relational, kind of contextual world of how our mind operates. Right, now what? So Kelly Wilson talks about kind of two frames of mind. And I'm sure you can find neuroscientific correlates if you wanted to ground this in it. I just haven't done it. You can call it the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems or whatever. But our typical frame of mind is our math problem mind, problem solving mind, right? And that's where we're just like scanning it, looking at here's a problem, how can I fix it? What can I do? Okay, we're worrying, ruminating, thinking about problems, blah, 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 right? And then there's this other quality of mind, which is our sunset mind. And how many people have just gazed at like a sunset, maybe over the rock, over the Flatirons, with its beautiful clouds up above, and like the light changes from kind of like a brilliant yellow to gold, like crimson, and to like deep purple, or even just a part of it that have just kind of been struck, like it just kind of stops, and then there's just sort of exhale perhaps, and just marvel. There's a sense of wonder. Anybody ever have that experience? Have any of you like made that experience more fulfilling by, well, you know what, if that cloud was just a little to the left, and then that cloud were higher up, and then if there was just streaks of light that could come through there, that would be so much more awesome. Has that like ever sort of added to your experience of a beautiful sunset? That kind of problem solving, let's call it? No? No? Yeah. So, people often come to us presenting their math problems. I've got this, I can't be in relationships, never had a job, I failed out of school, all my friends are going on. What the fuck's wrong with me? I'm a loser. These are all math problems that they want to solve. And it's very easy to sort of step in there and be like, oh yeah, okay. Well, have you done tutoring? Have you gone to the special needs person? Have we done this, right? Have you looked at, sort of assertiveness training? Blah, 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 right? It's very easy to step in there. And on the flip side of this, this sort of ACT approach, we're talking about, like, people more often are seeking validation and being seen before any change agenda is engaged, right? They want to actually be appreciated and known. And that requires us really slowing everything down, really stepping into our own sense of wonder and curiosity and open eyes and open hearts. Actually sort of taking them in, like we take in a sunset. We kind of mingle our mind and the space of that beauty. That's an invitation here from this way of working. Just before we even talk anything, before we even do anything about the math problems, we want to deeply understand the human being who is suffering, who is longing to live a different life, who has experienced joy and lost it, or who has experienced suffering and doesn't know how to move forward beyond it. As long as our questions remain on this very sort of practical, okay, tell me about your problems and let's solve them, I mean, we could be really missing the whole ground of what any therapeutic relationship must rest on, which is a sense of dignity, a sense of I see you, I'm with you, I know what it's like to suffer too, and I'm not afraid to bring that forward here so that we can actually have a very real human experience together that validates and welcomes those aspects of yourself that are so scary and terrifying that you haven't found a way to do that without being totally alone and isolated. Because if anybody knows,
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So this piece of, when I started learning about this piece, I got so kind of jazzed up. Obviously client-centered, obviously joining, obviously, just broadening, kind of the felt sense experience and all of that, and I love all of that piece. To me, there's also this like really functional, practical piece that opens up like kind of a whole world for me, and that something that I know, it's like, is it Sisyphus with the rock? There's something about resistance, like when I just heard that news that I wasn't expecting about that email from Katrina, like my mind went to like, oh my God, what about this? That seems possible, that seems likely, this seems bad. Like I went into this whole, like I got like this in terms of like, what do I do? What, you know, and I got tight and narrow in this sort of way. And I, you know, since we've done this work and since I've done mindfulness, you know, I was able to kind of catch that process of my mind. And, you know, I've again and again and again given myself permission to be in a place of kind of not knowing and to like widen that gap and to be able to get to, okay, that happened. Just acceptance of like, whoa, I don't know what this means. I don't have to know what this means. But actually, if I can be in acceptance, remove my resistance in the mind that my mind says, you know, you should feel this way, you should do this way, you should have this experience. If I can go like, whoa, those are options. Those are not, you know, I don't have to actually be ruled by those things. I can be in this place of acceptance. And I think that's where I find a lot of the possibility that Jarrell was speaking about. And also just, and then from this real functional way, I actually have an energy to kind of be with that whole piece because I'm not using up all this energy and resistance. So there's a platform of that, of possibility. And then when it comes to identify, you know, the time to take some action or identify the step, I actually have some freedom and some fluidity and some energy to do that when that's called for. So I love all the joining heart thing, and there's this also really functional piece to me that I just think I don't find in a lot of platforms. It's a very distinct part of ACT to me.
Yeah, and I would say it's with FAP too, and I'm trying to not be jumping on my whole new ship here, but they're really sort of two wings of the bird in some ways. And that functional piece of like that kind of any sort of resistance in our own being, that's our work to do, is to notice when we're sitting with somebody and there's like this, like, whoo, okay, that's something happening in me right now. That to sit and sort of blame the client for eliciting my own resistance is, that's a strategy. But it's not a strategy that's going to be effective in serving the role that we've signed up to serve in that relationship, right? So anytime, like what I love about this work and where this the energy for me comes from, that juice, is that like I get to go to work and relate to people and learn how to be a better human being in just doing that. Because every single person I meet is going to press a different button or press the same button in a different way to a different extent. And it's like, whew, as long as I can be aware of where I start to close down and centralize and go really into this like mode, it's like this is the practice of taking a breath, taking a step back, getting really curious, and then sort of putting that into our case conceptualization with our client, case conceptualization for our own behaviors and vulnerabilities in working with this particular client and how that might impact the work that we do, and really bringing all of that stuff into this intelligent mix of how do we liberate this suffering in this moment. That's interesting. Yeah, and thanks for bringing that forward. That we are very much in the same soup as everybody that we know. All right, so expansion and opening up. Whew, okay. Hey guys. Classic ACT metaphor here, exercise. Right. So remember I was saying that a lot of the first sort of phase in ACT can be quite a bit of psychoeducation in terms of you're really helping the client to come into making an agreement with you about what the nature of the work will be, and that the nature of the work is not going to be about making them feel better. The nature of the work is going to be about actually living a more fulfilling and rich, vital life. It's based on what they deeply want and long for in their values and goals. Right? So a lot of the time we're having to turn clients away from their agenda of just make this problem go away to, you know what? I want actually, if this problem went away, what would you then do? Then I'd be able to go out and have fun. Oh, okay. How about we look at, let's have fun as the agenda, right? Fun is a value here. What would fun look like? Well, it'd be spending time with people I like. Oh, okay, friendship here, great. Now we're getting somewhere. But oftentimes, we really have to do some work around helping people to sort of see, why would we do that? Why wouldn't we just take off the low-hanging fruit of anxiety before we move on to the things that anxiety inhibits them from doing? So we talked about sort of how our problem-solving mind has adapted and evolved to solve problems in the external world. And yet it's very different when it goes into the world within the skin, right? And so, has anybody not heard, or we'll just do it again because it's good. It's good for the kids. It's good for us. So imagine that you're hooked up to the world's greatest polygraph, lie detector, right? And so any change of anxiety, it's going to measure, and a light will go off, so it's letting me know that, oh, you're anxious. And I'm going to give you one job to do, one job only, and that is to not be anxious. And because this is so important, because anxiety is such a problem, I really want you to do well in this. I really want you to learn. So, if you get anxious, I'm going to pull out my .30 caliber pistol, and I'm going to shoot you in the knee. How's that for a setup? Anybody experience a little bit of anxiety just in sort of going through that? It's cool, right?
Well, you were like, I need you to do well, and I was like,
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't need the gun.
Yeah, right. So this setup sounds absurd. And yet it's something that we do in our own minds. In the sense that, wow, like, I can't be anxious for that. If I'm too anxious, my prospective employer will know. And so I've got to control my anxiety and not let people know that I'm anxious. Because if they know, then, then I'm in big trouble, right? So in that scenario, it's sort of like, oh, anxiety is a big problem. You've got to avoid it at all costs. And if you don't avoid it, something even worse is going to happen. Right? This is the setup for panic. We become anxious about our own anxiety. Or become depressed about our own depression. Right? And so one of the other metaphors we have is like, it's like we're always trying to turn the dial down. And it's like, you come into therapy and you just want me to help you turn the volume down of your anxiety from an 8 to a 5. Ultimately to a 1 or a 2, right? And if we can sort of like try to crank on that dial, but in a way, cranking on that dial in a desperate attempt to just make it go down is very much like that same situation. Where we're just like, just go down. And if you don't go down, then I'm not doing it right. And if I'm not doing it right, then what the hell's wrong with me? It's never going to change. I'm always going to be like this. Nothing's ever going to go right for me! Right? Now it's at a 10. God, I'm having a full-blown panic attack. What's wrong? You're the worst therapist ever. Right. So we call that sort of like, the volume switch. But it's like, what we say then, well, if that's not going to work, and you've been trying to do this, you've been trying to manage your anxiety, turn the volume down. You smoke pot before you do things. You drink at night to sort of help you go to sleep. You're, you do these like weird serenity now things. You avoid a lot of situations to keep your anxiety down. You've stopped taking on significant projects because you're afraid you're going to just fail anyway, and that gets your anxiety going. And so you've started to live this very sort of this life that's very rid of anxiety, and you're miserable. That's awful. And have you succeeded in not experiencing any anxiety? When you think about your future, does anxiety show up there? Volume's up. Right? So if all of these, if this strategy of just turning the volume down worked, I would be doing it. I would do it with every client. The thing is it just doesn't seem to work very often in very many contexts. So what if there was another option here? And what if instead of trying to turn the dial, there was a switch that was right over here? And we can call that willingness. Is your willingness switch on? Or is your willingness switch off? Would you be willing to have anxiety if it meant that you could learn how to do the things that you were wanting to do? Yes? No? And so then that switch can become a very, very much of a working metaphor in your work. And you start to see them turn that switch off. Just turned off the call period. Sorry.
I don't have that call today.
Okay.
Thanks.
And you can start to name it, right? Like, oh, I think you just turned the willingness switch off. Or is that on? And let's talk about it. Not that I'm sort of like the master of your experience, but that you're trying to help them to develop an internal gauge of how they are tracking their own mind and their own relationship to their mental events, right? Acceptance is a choice. Anxiety, not so much. And so in terms of helping people to make the choice for willingness, for acceptance, we can actually help them by bringing attention to where we start to see them opening and where we start to see them closing, so that they can actually notice those choice points internally, in their relationship, in their stance to their own experience. Make sense? All right. I think this is, has anybody seen this video here? Yeah? Yeah, a lot of people who, yeah. Anyway, it's awesome. It's worth seeing multiple times. Eleanor is amazing.
Well, what is the name of it?
Her name is Eleanor. She's in the Hearing Voices Network. I can send out the link.
This is a story about a voice therapist. And it begins with me as an anxious teenager leaving home to go to university. Now, these were happy days at first. I'd done well at school, expectations for me were high, and I eagerly entered the student life of lectures, parties, and traffic cone theft. Now, underneath this veneer, I was actually deeply unhappy and emotionally interrupted, but I was skilled at hiding it. And it was with considerable surprise when I was joined in my second term by a new presence, a disembodied voice, which calmly narrated everything I did in the third person. She is reading, she is going to a lecture, she is leaving the room. It was neutral, banal, oddly companionate, although I did notice it sometimes mirrored my own unexpressed emotion. So, for example, if I was angry and had to hide it, which I often did, being very adept at concealing how I really felt, then the voice sounded frustrated, but otherwise it was neither sinister nor disturbing. Now, it was then that I made a fatal mistake in that I mentioned the voice to a friend, and she was horrified. Her implication was that I should immediately seek medical help, which I did, and which proved to be mistake number 2. Now, I spent some time telling the campus GP about what I perceived to be the real problem: anxiety, low self-worth, fears about the future, and was met with bored indifference until I mentioned the voice, upon which he dropped his pen, swung round, and began to question me with a show of real interest. And to be fair, I was desperate for interest and help, and I began to tell him about my strange commentator. And I always wish at this point the voice had said she is digging her own grave. I was referred to a psychiatrist who also took a grim view of the voice's presence, subsequently interpreting everything I said through a lens of latent insanity. So, for example, I was part of a student TV station that broadcast news bulletins around the campus, and during an appointment, which was running very late, I said, "Sorry doctor, I've got to go. I'm reading the news at 6. Now it's down in my medical records, Eleanor has delusions that she's a television news broadcaster." Now, it was at this point that events began to rapidly overtake me. A hospital admission followed, the first of many. A diagnosis of schizophrenia came next. And then, worst of all, a prolonged and toxic sense of hopelessness and despair about myself and my prospects that tormented me beyond endurance and drained me through humiliation, helplessness, and loss of self-respect into a shadow of myself. But having been encouraged to see the voice, not as an experience, but as a symptom, my fear and resistance towards it intensified. And this essentially represented taking an aggressive stance against my own mind, and in turn, the voices increased, one voice became 12, and grew progressively menacing and hostile, setting me bizarre tasks, ordering me to harm myself as I grew increasingly demoralised and disempowered. 2 years later, and I have the whole frenzied repertoire, terrifying voices, grotesque visions, bizarre, intractable delusions. My mental health status had been a catalyst for verbal abuse, discrimination, and physical and sexual assault. And I've been told by my psychiatrist, Eleanor, you would be better off with cancer because cancer is easier to cure than schizophrenia. I've been labelled, I've been medicated, and I've been left. And by now, I was so tormented by my voices that I attempted to drill a hole in my head in order to get them out. Now, 6 minutes is not enough time to fully credit those good and generous people who fought with me and for me and who waited to welcome me back from that agonised, lonely place. But together they forged a blend of courage, creativity, integrity, and an unshakable belief that my shattered self had become healed and whole. And crucially, they helped me to understand what I'd always suspected, that my voices were a meaningful response to painful life events, particularly childhood events, and as such were not my enemies, but a source of insights into solvable emotional problems. And so, ultimately, I gathered together my splintered self, each fragment represented by a different voice. And I went back to psychiatry, and this time, from the other side, I returned to study and gained the highest degree in psychology that the university had ever given, and 1 year later, the highest master's, which I always say isn't bad for a nutter. In fact, during my stats exam, one of the voices actually dictated the answers, which technically possibly counts as cheating. Thank you. I worked in the NHS, I spoke at conferences, I published book chapters and academic papers, and I argued, and continue to do so, that an important question in psychiatry shouldn't be what's wrong with you, but rather what's happened to you. And all the while, I listened to my voices, with whom I'd finally learned to live with peace and respect, and which in turn represented a growing sense of compassion, acceptance, and respect towards myself. I'm now very proud to be part of the International Hearing Voices movement, an initiative inspired by the work of Professor Marius Rom and Dr. Sondra Escher, which locates voice hearing as a creative and ingenious survival strategy, a sane reaction to insane circumstances, not as an abstract symptom of illness to be endured, but as a complex, significant, and meaningful experience to be explored. As Peter Levine has said, the human animal is a unique being, endowed with an instinctual capacity to heal and the intellectual spirit to harness this innate capacity. In this respect, I would like the TED audience to be aware of two things. Firstly, that as members of society, there is no greater honour than facilitating that process for someone. And for survivors of distress and adversity, that we remember what lies behind us and what lies ahead of us are small matters compared to what lies within us. As a very wonderful doctor once said to me, don't tell me what other people have told you about yourself. Tell me about you. Thank you.
So there's no realm of human experience that can be that needs to live outside of the realm of acceptance. Like, oh, you think of like schizophrenia as these, as a medical neurological condition. It's just that means and actually, let's look at that. It's really related. Winged Horse has built an institution on the premise of compassionate, intelligent, deep relationship. And that can actually work to bring out the intelligence and the functionality of what is presenting as symptoms. And learning how to actually relate to our own minds. How our clients can learn to relate to their own minds with a sense of peace, openness, courage, and how that actually shifts the functions of their symptoms themselves, such that, like, instead of eliciting fear, it can actually elicit compassion. Easy to say, challenging to do, and yet that is our path that we've taken as helping professionals in this field. Any questions or feedback from that? Yeah. Okay, in the interest of time, let's see, just coming back to the hexaflex, for those new to the group, the hexagram of psychological flexibility, otherwise known as the hexaflex, right here. Let's see, we've done diffusion, cognitive fusion, right? This was acceptance, willingness, or experiential avoidance, right? Experiential avoidance, any of that resistance in ourselves, in our clients, that sort of knee-jerk tightening, that's experiential avoidance, right? And it goes from like just a mild kind of inner reaction to full-blown suicide as like the ultimate gesture of experiential avoidance. All right, so moving on to what's known as maybe the spiritual axis or the infinite axis. This is the axis in which our experience actually unfolds, right? So the observer self and here and now. So the I, here, now. That is the one constant of our life. Who you are here and now there's the same you that was there 20 years ago, there and then, in some capacity. There's this perspective that has been continued, despite all the shifting thoughts, feelings, emotions, bodies, traumas, triggers that have sort of all the passengers that have come onto your bus, so to speak, all the things that you've learned. That has moved over time. And yet, so if we were able to connect with that sense of self, of just, there's this part of me that's been me this whole time, despite all of the wounds and all of the fear. There's a part of me that has remained unblemished by my experience. If we can connect with that more often, maybe that could provide a greater measure of willingness and courage and acceptance, believing that it's actually what you experience may not annihilate you. There's an aspect of you that will endure, that has endured everything to this point. That we catch glimpses of incredible clarity, despite how confused we may be. That's available to us. Is there a way that we can sort of learn to have those experiences be a bit less haphazard? Maybe. Let's see. And then here and now. And so, again, as we populate this hexaflex, these are all areas that we're going to be sort of looking at. These are processes that we're assessing in ourselves and in our clients. Looking at sort of what do they know? What is their repertoire around selfing behaviors? In terms of are their selfing behaviors more consistent with fostering a sort of observing, curious, open self? Or is it more down into centralizing, where they start to infer meaning about the events that happen to them in terms of reinforcing conceptual ideas about who they are or not, right? One is more flexible, one is more rigid. So if what we're here to do is expand their psychological flexibility, if this is a common process that they engage in, well, that might become a central target of our work together. Right? Observer sense of self actually is very much entailed with an ability to contact here and now. Right? To really just be present, be noticing, and be aware of the actual discrete stimuli of our basic experience. Right? What gets in the way of that oftentimes is when our minds are attending to abstract conceptualizations of the future, ruminations on memories constructed or reconstructed from our past. So, I was so stressed yesterday, I wasn't myself. Then who were you? I totally stole this slide from Louise McHugh. It's Louise McHugh. I thought this was funny, right? Like, oh, that wasn't me. That wasn't me. Well, it's interesting. What?
Oh, it just reminds me of I Heart Huckabees.
Yeah.
It's like, how am I not myself?
Yeah. How am I not myself? Right. And it's like we do these mental gymnastics to sort of carve out territory of ourselves. And then we kind of explain away, often incredibly irrationally, throw it into this closet of sort of like mismatched self-experiences. There was like, I don't even, let's go back into the foyer, shall we? Come on. Oh, no, don't go in that room. Shoot. Right? And you see how that metaphor could actually then become, could take life? That it's like, wow, you've got a mansion available to you, but nobody can get past the front entranceway. Right? You serve tea at the base of your stairs. Right? Like, what would it be like to take somebody into this other room? Right? Chess or necklace?
Chess.
Chessless.
Chessless. That conjured up some images.
All right. We have to choose one.
What's it? Yeah, we got to choose one in the interest of time.
Necklace chat.
What? Well, I've heard a bunch of chess, and I'm gonna go with chess. All right. So again, psychoeducation is a big part here in service of sort of like shifting the mindset, shifting the sort of like the way we conceptualize, or our clients conceptualize their struggle, and what actually the path out of their struggle is. This, Trungpa Rinpoche once said that, greet chaos as good news. In a way, this is an act stance. It's like, let's greet confusion as good news. Let's find ways to constructively confuse people so that they can kind of be disoriented and be like, what? Wait a second. That's a good place. Because confusion is a step towards diffusion. Does that make sense? Right? Because we're starting, as we allow ourselves to become confused, it means we're letting go of our known orienting points. And in that space, we may be able to move to something new, because we're no longer grasping tight on the sort of like safety of home base, right? Home base and tag, right? If you're unwilling to sort of risk it, you're never going to get further than here. Right? These kinds of exercises that I'm doing, these are very much like, do these in therapy, right? It's like, this is your home base, right? You do not want to go anywhere where you don't feel more anxiety than that. So this is what's available. Right? Have the clients do this. Experience it. This is embodied stuff. All right, so psychoed, helping people shift out confusion, right? Okay, so if we were sort of targeting observer self as one of these processes, the rigid self-concept, right?